Okay, let's talk about Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is Monday, and very underrated holiday. My Tu B'Shvat growing up consisted of the school giving out what they would call buxer. That's carob for those who are unaware. The Spartan probably have no idea what that is. Basically, you break your teeth on it. It's like this carob fruit type thing. I don't even know if it's called fruit. It's like whatever. My mom loves it though, so hi mom, shout out. Anyway, yeah. So what's the deal with Tu B'Shvat? So we'll talk about just very quickly halakhically, and then obviously this is a Mussar Schmooze, so we're gonna try and get some lessons. So first of all, where do we see the Rosh Hashanah for trees? What's going on over here? So it's in the Mishnah at the beginning of Maseches Rosh Hashanah. It's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel when the Rosh Hashanah for trees is. According to Beis Hillel, it's Tu B'Shvat, and according to Beis Shammai, it's Al B'Shvat, which is Aleph Shvat, which is the first of Shvat, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Two obviously being Tezvav, which is 15. So that's a machlokas. Again, halakhically, not really so much. I'm not going to bore you with the details. It's in a nutshell, it's the cutoff for agriculture. Um, One of the dinim that come up is to use if you're going to give meiser, shumas and meisers for your fruits, right? So you shouldn't use produce from one year for another year, even though that stuff has kind of survived from one to the next. Also, if you're familiar with the Shemitah cycle, so different years' produce has to be given and tithed, right, differently, right? Some years the Shemitah cycle there's Meiser Ani, some years of the Shemitah cycle there's Meiser Sheni. Again, if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Don't worry. It basically, long story short, it's important to know which year a fruit is from. That's very basic. Obviously, not really so relevant for the hashkafic shmooze of the avoda or the Mussar, right, of the holiday. That's just the source. That's just the makor in the Mishnah for the Chag of Tu B'Shvat. So what's the Mussar for us? What's the avoda of Tu B'Shvat? So it's basically the same idea thought about in different ways, and the idea revolves around the following. In Parsha Shoftim, the Torah gives us a pretty strange halacha, although when you read about it, think about it a lot, it makes sense. But at first glance, it's a strange halacha and seems to have absolutely nothing to do with Tu B'Shvat. The Torah tells us that if a Jewish army is laying siege to an enemy city, so the Torah says that you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees to make a battering ram, a fence, whatever. Right, the pasuk says, "Kitzasor ir yamim rabim lilachem alei latafsa." If you're fighting against the city for many days to capture it, lo tashchis et eitzal indoch alav garzen. You should not cut down its trees, right, with with an axe or whatever. Ki mimenu tochel, right, because that's what you eat from. V'osolo sichros, that you shouldn't cut down. And then in the pasuk says the line that's important for us: Ki hadam eitz hasadeh, because man is a tree of the field, lavomi panach to enter the siege before you. That last part of the pasuk is very strange. What in the world does that mean? Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, because a man is a tree of the field. What does that mean? So Rashi says, right, it's kind of rhetorical. It's like, is a tree like a man? You're sitting here besieging men, not trees. Leave the trees out of this, right? Don't you don't have to cut down fruit trees. They didn't do anything to you, so just leave it there. That seems to be like kind of like what Rashi is explaining. But many of the Rishonim, the commentaries on the Gemara, the Ibn Ezra, the Ramban, Rashbam, right, Sforno, a lot of them disagree with Rashi, and they basically explain that the Torah is, and maybe I misread Rashi and he agrees with them, but okay, either way, those Rishonim, right, write that the Torah is giving a reason for the Isser, and the Torah is comparing men and trees, and the pasuk literally means that man is a tree of the field in the sense that, right, men benefit. And this, again, we're going to extend this, but in the very basic sense, people benefit from fruit-bearing trees, right? We get fruit. Good. So don't cut it down because you're going to use other trees to conquer the city, right? You're going to use. Okay, fine. So according to the Rishonim, basically the psukim mean literally that man is a tree of the field. Man benefits from the tree of the field. Okay. The comparison, though, that the Mussar Chazal make, as you'll see, and certainly Hasidic Rebbe's are all over it, is that what in the world is the comparison between a man and a tree? Right? We know that Torah is compared to a tree, right? It's Chaim Hila Machazikim Ba, right? That the Torah is like a tree, right? That we know. How is a person a tree? And the other question that kind of influences this and kind of kind of gives schmooze's worthy material is that the timing is very curious. If you're going to celebrate the trees, right? It feels weird to celebrate it when they're completely dead. when they're completely bare, there's nothing on them, right? It makes a lot more sense if you're going to celebrate the trees, if that's what we're trying to do, and thank Hashem for the fruits, and then that's part of it. But why aren't we doing this in the middle of summer when like the tree is flush with like oranges and whatnot? Right? That sounds like a much better way to celebrate the fruit. Now we do celebrate the fruit, right? In Tishrei, there's something called Bikurim. Now you bring the first fruits of your tree to the Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot. But it is curious that the month of Shvat is when we celebrate the Rosh Hashanah for trees, and that's celebrated. This is not just demarcated by halacha. Right? It's celebrated as a holiday. We don't say tachanun, etc. Fine. So all the Torah that I could find, basically, and I'm sure there's others, but all the Torah that I could find, right, is that Tu B'Shvat basically revolves around this idea that man is compared to a tree. And yeah, Rachel, yeah, was that a question? I can't tell. Yeah, she
Yeah,
gotta be
sorry.
more aggressive. I'm
Wait,
sorry. I'm
wait,
not always looking at this at the Zoom.
that's okay. I just want to like clarify what,
Yeah.
okay, number one, for the war thing, they weren't allowed to cut it down during Tu B'Shvat or ever.
No, ever, ever.
Okay. And then also, what was the thing about the men? Like, not, I don't get that part. Like, what was the quote about like cutting down men? I don't know.
What do you mean?
Like,
The pasuk says, "Ki Adam eitz asada." The reason that you shouldn't cut down trees, the pasuk says, is because man is a tree of the field. And what in the world does that mean? So most of the Rishonim understand that to mean that people benefit from fruit trees. So therefore, there's no reason to cut it down. You just benefit. You should just benefit from the fruit, and cutting it down is kind of cutting your nose to spite your face. But this pasuk is kind of what, as we'll quote a bunch of Rebbes, right? That's what they harp on. That ki ha'adam eitz hasada, because man is a tree of the field. And the question is, what is that? So at first glance, right, there are similarities, right? Just like a tree has roots and fruit, right? So two people have roots and fruit, right? People have their history, the backstory, where they come from. That's their roots. We literally call it that, right? The family tree, family roots. And then a person has fruits, right? Not roots, but fruits, right? Their actions, their Torah, their mitzvos, in the literal sense, their kids, right? Their children, their grandchildren, etc. But let's take it a little bit deeper, and learn some hopefully geschmack lessons from it. So first of all, the Shemi Shmuel uh, says, what's this split between Beis Hill and Beis Shammai? Right, what's this machlokas? It's the Tu B'Shvat, it's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Like obviously not halacha, but like that's the shmooze. That's the Gemara discusses what exactly in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. But hashkafically, what is this split? So the Shemi Shmuel explains fascinatingly, right? Again, a little Hasidish, so be ready for this stuff. But as follows, he says there's several scenarios, several places in Chazal in our sages' writings that we find that the first third of something, right? The first one third of something is the growth stage. For example, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi Zayin, and it says that according to Tana de Be'elio, they learned in the base medrash of Elio and Navi, which is always cool to see, that the world will. And you guys know this, right? People quote this all the time when it comes to like the Kitz Mashiach, whatever. Not sure. Literally, what it means is not what we're focusing on right now, but just the concept, right? The Gemara there says that the world will exist for 6,000 years. The first 2,000 is going to be chaos. The second 2,000 is going to be Torah, and the third 2,000 will be Messianic times. Now, regardless of what that means and how you break it down, and it's going to be 6,000 years, and this, and that, whatever that, the details of that mean, the first third, says the Shemi Shmuel, is some sort of development, some sort of maturity, right? But before the Torah is able to be received, because otherwise Hashem would have given the Torah on day one. For whatever reason, there needed to be one third of the world completed, finished, whatever, existing before the
wait,
Torah was
Robbie, the
able
first one is
to
what?
receive. Well,
The first third is what?
the first third of what do you mean?
Of
Is
the 6,000.
the first third, the Gemara says, is going to be chaotic. And the Shemi Shmuel explains that that's going to be some sort of maturity process, that the Torah was not able to be received, right, until that one third, those 2,000 years were done, right? The Torah was given, what's the year? Is it 19 like 40 something? I forget already. Well, what year exactly, Hebrew year the Torah was given. But anyway, it was about 2,000 years in. So that, again, very basically, says the Shemi Shmuel, they seem that there had to be a waiting period before the Torah can get, and he says there's some sort of maturity that needed to happen. Second of all, there's a halacha that a Jew is not held culpable for sins, right, in Shemayim, right, before age 20. Right, the Mishnah says, Ben Esrim La'onshim, that when a person turns 20, that's when they start being, held culpable and they can be punished, etc. Again, disregarding, right, the deep dive into exactly what that means, right? That's roughly, says the Shem Shmuel, that's roughly one third of a Jew's life. Again, Pasuk says in Tehillim, right? Yemei Shnosenu Behem Shivim Shana, that word 70 years is basically how long we live. And Shemi Shmuel plays around with that number and says, okay, there's 6 days of the week, and the seventh day is Shabbos. So the first 60 years of a person's life is like the week, and then the seventh decade is Shabbos. It's a replay of the first six. Okay, he plays around with the numbers. But long story short, the first third, right, of a person's life is spent growing, maturing, to the point where they're not held liable for mistakes and things that they do. And third, most importantly for us, says Shemi Shmuel, is our concept. He says Shvat, if you notice, is the fifth month of the year. Right? Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat. So that means, quick math, that means that 4 months have passed, i.e., one third of the year has completed. Right? And so in the physical world, right, when the earth kind of goes into hibernation and deep freeze and whatever, it takes these months to renew and get going. That's scientifically proven. Okay, so too, the parallel is true, right, in the spiritual world. Right? He says that on Rosh Hashanah we get a new psak din, a new life, as it were. But just like all lives, as we've seen, right, it takes time for maturity, right, for the potential to be actualized, to be ready. So he says that also once one third of the year has passed, so now the spiritual capacity, right, of a Jew has reached its full power and it's ready to burst forth, right, and bear fruit. And obviously, bear fruit meaning the mitzvahs, Torah, mitzvahs, etc. That's the analogy, right, from Tu B'Shvat. I would say that that is a fascinating paradigm shift because I don't know if you're like me, but by this time of the year, I feel like, well, so much for all those resolutions I made in Rosh Hashanah. I've already wasted 4 months, haven't done anything. I guess it's going to be another one of those years. That's usually how it works. But no, says the Shemi Shmuel, you weren't ready to accomplish those big ideas that you had at Rosh Hashanah time. Right? You needed time for it to, I don't know, grow, mature, vegetate, whatever the word is, to roll around in your brain, to think about new ideas, to get yourself ready to change. And now it's time. Now you're ready to roll. Right? So don't get distressed for that you've quote unquote wasted 4 months and haven't started working on, I don't know, your Rosh Hashanah, your Lashon Hara resolution, your Hilchos Shabbos resolution, or your Shnai Mikra, whatever you're learning, whatever you thought you were going to learn. Shemi Shmuel says, no, you just weren't ready yet. Right, so buckle down, right? Open up that notebook or your notes app or whatever you typed up those Rosh Hashanah resolutions on, right? And get back to work, right? And that's he says now that's mamish, this is the time for renewal and time for us to accomplish those things. And therefore he explains the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel through this lens. He says Beis Shammai, right, makes sense because Rosh Chodesh Shvat is exactly one third through the year. Why does Beis Hillel though say it's the 15th of Shvat? So he says, what's the 15th of Shvat 4 months after? 15th of Tishrei. What happens on the 15th of Tishrei? That's Sukkot. Right? Sukkot, we know, is a Gemara din for water, right? That we're judged on Sukkot, the Mishnah says, the next Mishnah, but it talks about Tu B'Shvat at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, and the next Mishnah talks about the judgment for water, and it says we're judged for water on Sukkot. That's why we have Nisuch HaMayim, we have these water libations, etc. And water is like Torah, right? You get the idea, right? So 4 months after kind of we've judged for water, i.e., again, that's the physical parallel, but the spiritual parallel, right, is Torah, right? So that's when we're ready to roll. That we've gotten, we've gotten through our maturity point, right? And that's the Mussar that Shemi Shmuel kind of brings out is that we think that we've wasted one third of our year, but really, right now, we're ready to get started. And that's tremendous chizuk, I think, right? Because sometimes, right, we feel like the winter is just kind of rolling by and we're kind of just waiting for Purim. And no, it's important to kind of go back to your, kind of like we talked about by Shovavim, right? It's important to go back to your Rosh Hashanah resolutions, kind of refocus yourself, right? And get back to work with a new chizuk that, yeah, now it's time to roll. Okay, good. That's one shot. Rav Melech, couldn't have a shiur without mentioning Rav Melech. That's for you, Leah. Good. Points out that again, as we said, Tu B'Shvat is the rebirth of the trees, and he points out the Zman, as I alluded to before, the timing of the holiday is curious, right? Because we don't see the fruit on the trees, but instead, right, we don't. I mean, we see like a tiny little bud, right? We don't see trees blooming and blossoming. There's no noticeable difference on the tree. If you get close, you can see like tiny buds. He says that's what's making this day a chag. He says, we don't see the rebirth, but we believe that it's happening. right? We know that it's happening naturally, but we believe that it's happening. And said that's a type of Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah Li'ilanos. It's the new year for trees. Says he quotes Chasam Sofer, and he says that should be mechazek, right? Our emuni b'tachon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because a lot of the things that Hashem does, we don't see. Right. So here again, we're having this kind of immunity talk on what we're trying to do. We're trying to celebrate something that we barely see, right? But that's something that's gonna have big impact right later on, right? And therefore, should be mechazik our immunity bitachon, right? We don't necessarily see what Hashem is cooking up for us, right? But in a few months, right, eventually, well, we'll see trees covered with leaves, and for us also, in a few months, we'll see what Hashem was exactly right cooking up for us. I would argue, and that is also tremendous mussar, right? Very often, right, we don't think in a slightly different vein we don't believe that our efforts do anything, right? We don't see the fruits of our getting up on time to daven shacharis, or our 5 minutes of Hilchos Lashon Hara, right? Or whatever, learning the parsha, right? We don't see those visible results. It's not there. We don't. We okay. We maybe we feel good a little bit. Yes, we check that box, but we don't see actual physical growth to our eyes. Tu B'Shvat reminds us, right, to celebrate our unseen successes, right? Celebrate the beginnings, right, of growth, right? Celebrate the this what is it? The physical, the sap going through the trees to kind of what is it? Pollinate. Pollinate's the wrong word, right? To make the make the tree the fruit grow. That's also something that we have to celebrate. Not just the stuff when we see, oh, we make a siyum or we see some tremendous growth compared to what we were previously. It's the little things, right? And the things that will seed, right, our eventual right success. Rav Asher Weiss, right, takes a different Limud Torah kind of spin on it.
Is
He
it
quotes a
not,
saver. Yeah,
is it not a little bit, this is my extremism talking.
yeah.
Um, is it, is it not a little bit like Gaivadik to have, mm, I'm trying to figure out how to word it, to celebrate like my own, like whatever?
No.
Okay.
Do we just leave it
Okay.
at that, or should I just? No, it's not Gaividik to celebrate your accomplishments. It's Gaividik to celebrate things you have but did not work to accomplish, like your beauty, your wealth, your intelligence. That's Gaiva. But to celebrate something that you put an effort in, like, I don't know, you finish Sefer Bereshis, whatever. Uh, Something that you put an effort in, no, that's worthy celebration. The Gemara says that Gemara Shabbos says that Abai used to make a celebration anytime one of his Talmidim finished a Masechta. Um, he's throwing a party. So that's the marker for a siyum. And no, it's not gaivadik at all. If you put in that effort, right? If something was handed to you, so then you're a bal gaiva.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Rav Weiss quotes the Minhage Vermiza. That's I don't know, a sefer that he quotes. Never seen it before, but okay. He said that the minhag in Vermiza was to make a holiday where the boys wouldn't go to the base medrash, but they would go around giving fruit and food and then go back home, which is very odd, right? Why in the world wouldn't boys go to the base medrash? It's not Nittelnacht, right? What in the world is that? So he quotes a sefer called Eretz Tzvi. He quotes as Avnei Nezer. Avnei Nezer we've heard of, right? Chassidish Rebbe. He said it was a great day for Chedushay Torah. It was a great day for coming up with new thoughts and new understandings in the Torah, because on the day that the sap from the trees, right, starts coming up and starts being distributed to like the fruit of the tree, whatever, to give them life and flavor and I don't know whatever. So too the fruit of Torah, the fruit of your effort, your toil and learning, right, mature on this day. And Avnei Nezer himself felt that there was a hischadshus, an ability for him to kind of come up with new ideas. All right, okay, Beseder, again, that's just throwing that out there. He says in another right kind of vein, he says we know that just to I guess he really says it the best. So just to illustrate, the tree is a mushal for a person, not only because the pasuk says it, but in many ways, a tree is a mushal for a person. He says in a couple places in Chazal we see this not only in that pasuk. He says, for example, Rashi writes in the pasuk in Bamidbar, right? The pasuk in Bamidbar also completely not the same topic, but Moshe tells the Meraglim, right? Moshe sends spies into Eretz Yisrael, and he tells them what to look for. And one of the things he says is Hayesh ba eitz im ayin. Look to see if is a tree or not. So Rashi says, what in the world does that mean? So Rashi says it means im yesh bahem adam kosher sheyagin aleo b'schuso. Look to see if they have a tzaddik who will kind of protect them in their merits. The Gemara say quotes a Gemara in Avodah Zarah also that says that eitz is a hint to the Torah, and the fruit of the tree are a hint to Talmud Chacham, a studies Torah. And then Sota, Gemara and Sota and Daf Memvav also says that Misha Eino Ose Peros. That phrase, someone who doesn't make fruit, is a reference to someone who doesn't do any mitzvahs. That's how the Gemara phrases someone who doesn't do any mitzvahs. Okay, without the context over there, that's by Egla Rufa. But he says that very often we find the idea that a tzaddik is compared, right, and a person is compared to fruit. Again, that just to kind of finalize that idea, and then we'll go on to one final idea from Rav Pam. But he says, Pasuk says in Tehillim, Pasuk you said a lot, that tzaddik katamar yifrach keres bal vanon yizgeh. That a palm tree, right? That the tzaddik should be like a tamar, which is a palm tree, right, and also be like an erez, which is a cedar tree. And so Vasha Weiss points out that a palm tree has a lot of fruit and very few roots, right? The roots are not strong; they don't go everywhere. A cedar tree has massive roots, but very few fruit, doesn't have fruit. So he says a tzaddik can be both. Right? Tzaddik who has tremendous roots and also unbelievable has fruit, right? And that's the bracha that we're looking for. That Am Yisrael and the Torah, Shem mitzvahs, right? You should also, right? You should have the strong roots, right? But also, right, that tremendous amount of fruit. Okay, those were kind of flowery kind of illustrations I just wanted to point out. But Rav Pam, right, has 3 points that are unbelievable, I thought, and I wanted to mention Rav Pam again at Rosh Yeshiva Torah Vodaas in Brooklyn, I think. Could be wrong. I apologize. I'm not from that Yeshiva Shvelt, so if those details are incorrect, you guys will definitely zing me on that. But okay, either way. First of all, he says since something is happening under the earth, again, we pointed this before, I just mentioned it quickly, right? Something's happening to the trees, the sap begins to work its way up, and that's the same idea that sometimes, right, we also, no, well, I guess I should probably illustrate a little better, right? What's happening on Tu B'Shvat? We don't see anything happening. The tree is still dead, but there is life going up into it, right? That's when the tree starts to rebloom, right? The sap is going up into the tree and giving it new life, etc. And that eventually will result in buds and blossoms and flowers and fruit and all that stuff. So he says, so too by a person, sometimes it seems that a person has no spiritual life. It seems like they're dead. A person feels like they have no connection to a Akadosh Baruch Hu, right? It feels like so we go through rough patches, right? We feel depressed, we feel not connected, etc. But he says, so just like on Tu B'Shvat, where it looks dead, but there really is life flowing through it, right? Beginning to flow through it, right? The spark of the neshama also is waiting there, right? To kind of to flow through. And really someone who feels like they have no connection to Akash Baruch Hu should just do something to kind of spark themselves, and then they'll be able to take off, and you end up with your flowers, your buds, your blossoms, your flowers, etc. Says another schmooze, right, is that's very powerful. Like, we could have ended it on that. But another schmooze, he says, is to, again, we kind of alluded to this before, is to acknowledge the miraculous nature that we see on a daily basis, right? If a person would contemplate, right, the countless amount of miracles that happens in the development of even the simplest organisms in nature, right, just logically, right, it leads to a person to more emunah bitachon, right? If you would just contemplate the greatness, right, and the intricacy of nature, right? So the natural reaction, see what I did there, is to learn better, is to daven better, is to have more emunah, is to recognize the Kosh Baruch Hu, and just realize when a person starts to feel, says Rapam, when a person starts to feel Shivisi Hashem Anegli Samid by looking around at the world, even though it's snowing, it's barren, it's dark, but you know what's going on behind the scenes, under the ground, right? If you look at the simple things in the world, things you take for granted, and realize that they're actually godly gifts, right? You come, right, into more emunah bitachon and Akash Baruch Hu. And he quotes an unbelievable Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer says that the people of the desert were able to do this, recognize nature and recognize Akash Baruch Hu in a way that no one else was able to. How so? Tu B'Shvat always falls around Parshas B'Shalach, which is this week's Parsha, but Tu B'Shvat this year is actually a couple days after. Okay, whatever. In Parshas B'Shalach, it talks about the man. And the people who left Egypt and saw the man fall from the sky thought that was miraculous because, until then they'd eaten grain and bread and whatever that they'd grown in Mitzrayim. And when bread fell from the sky, right, that was obviously ridiculous and miraculous. Yet their children who were born in the desert, for them, that was the norm. That's all they knew. And so when they got to Eretz Yisrael and the month stopped, so they had to put seeds in the ground and a stalk of wheat grew up from there, to them, that was miraculous. Bread from Shemayim was the norm, and bread from the earth was a miracle. Right? What the fathers considered nature, the children thought was miraculous. And what the children thought was nature, the fathers thought was miraculous. So says Chasam Sofer, right? Miracles are just relative, right? It's just getting used to something, right? Everything is a miracle, right? We think of things as miracles, but we don't see them often, right? But really, everything is a miracle, right? And we take for granted and we're not shocked. But really, right, what Kosh Baruch Hu, right, is running behind the scenes, right? Just what you're used to is what you don't think is what you think is natural, and what you're not used to, right, that becomes miraculous. And finally, um, again, this is, we'll just mention, we'll finish off with this, is that again, the emphasis on Tu B'Shvat is from the fruits, right? We walk around with like, I don't know, apricots and dried plums or whatever. It's interesting in that when we get to Nisan, says Rav Pam, we're going to make a bracha on the trees. Right? With something called Birkas Ha'ilanos, the blessing on the trees. We say it on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And exactly why we don't say it now, as opposed to then, okay, whatever, fine. We wait for the trees to actually be visible on the tree. We wait for the fruits to be visible on the trees. Okay, but let's just, he mentions the text. He said the text of that bracha is, stay with me, Shelo chasar ba'olamo klum, that there's nothing missing in your world. Ubara bo, and Hashem created in this world brios tovos, good creations, ilano tovos, good trees, lehanos behem b'nei adam, for people to benefit, lahana, lehanos, for people to benefit from. Basically, the bracha is that thank you, Hashem, for giving us fruit and trees and fruits that we can benefit from, that people can benefit from. And Tosas and Brachos and Daf Lamed Zayin, Rav Pam points out that Tosas says that fruits are something that a person could have lived without. We don't need apples, oranges, dates, etc. We can survive on much less. If fruits were created, and this is the text of the bracha, fruits are created solely to give pleasure to Hashem's creations. And this proves, again, one of many proofs, but one of the main avodas of Tu B'Shvat, I would argue, is to remember that Hashem just wants good for us. Right? It's a time to contemplate when the many different ways Hashem enhances our lives that He didn't have to, right? To give us pleasure and enjoyment, right? And when a person you could, my wife likes to say all the time, the world could have been created in black and white, right? All the many millions of ways that Hakadosh Baruch Hu could have sustained us, but He gives us fruit and many, many other things just so we can enjoy, just so we can be b'simcha. Right? This creates a desire to express a karzat tov to Hakadosh Baruch Hu for His endless kindness. It also, for me, right, paints like a vivid, fresh relationship of our, a fresh picture of our relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Right? We're always told, right, everything Hashem does is for the best. Right? Kol David Rachman Latav Avid Gamzel Tova. Everything Hashem does is for the best. Hashem just wants to give us good for us to enjoy. But I don't know if we always believe that. But this is one of the proofs. Right? Tosas didn't. Tosas points out Hashem didn't have to create fruit. Could have just left it at grains and stuff. But He didn't, and that's one of the for us to kind of realize. Now, this is kind of like a Baal Tshuva Schmooze, but we're all kind of, right, Bali Tshuva, right, in a real sense, in the sense that we have aspects, again, of our spirituality which are dead, right? We have, again, we may not necessarily be, obviously, Chas v'shalom, but we're spiritually dead ourselves, but we definitely have aspects of ourselves that are not, where the Torah and Yiddishkeit we don't relate to or we don't fulfill at all, right? Similar to what we discussed by Shovavim, that this is a time when we can sit and plant seeds, right, and see the fruits of our labor, right, months or years later, right? When we're imagining that, that we're looking at a tree and the tree is filled with snow and it's not growing, but we know that something's going on inside that tree and it's gonna, kind of, it's gonna bloom and it's gonna blossom and it's gonna have fruit, etc. Right? So now is a time when we can kind of focus on the things inside of us which appear to be dead, as we mentioned before, but really we have that spark, right? Obviously, the neshama is able to do all those things that we're thinking, anything that you're thinking of right now. So starting to do 5 minutes, right, of whatever halacha or whatever avoda you're thinking about right now, right? So if you do that every day, right, that will result in real things. If you do 5 minutes of Shmir Salashon right now, right, you might still be saying Lashon Hara next week, but by 6 months, a year, right? Later on, your fruits will bloom and you will be someone who doesn't say Lashon Hara later in your life. Just like if you put $5 in a savings account, right? Obviously, that compounds over time. So 5 minutes a day, right? A little tiny nothing that you can't see, right? Just like a bud that you can't see on a tree. 5 minutes of Torah study or davening or Shmir Lashon. Everybody has something where they are a little bit kind of, winterish and kind of dead with their avodas Hashem, and then something that they can plant seeds for a better Torah life later on, right? To see the fruits later on. Again, we've talked about this a million times, but it bears repeating, right? 3 minutes of Hilchos Shabbos a day, right, will help you know Hilchos Shabbos. You're not going to know it tomorrow, but by the time you're 25, 30, that's a decade, right? A decade of 3 minutes a day, right? You're not going to see the results right away, but in a decade you will, right? It's just like a seed is not visible when it's in the ground and only when it blooms later on. Tu B'Shvat tells us that when you plant spiritual seeds right now, right, you will see results later. You don't need to do it right all at once, right? And frankly, that's possibly why Hashem created the physical process as is, right? Kodesh Baruch Hu could have set up the world where it was instantaneous, where you put a seed in the ground and it blooms right away. Right? We've seen those type of like, movies or cartoons or whatever, like in the future where they have like automatic meals where they put it, what is it, the Jetsons, where they put it in the microwave and just pops in? Not the Jetsons. That's a really old reference. My gosh, that's embarrassing. Whatever. Maybe it is the Jetsons. What do I know? Anyway, Kodesh Baruch Hu could have created the world.
Lunchables.
What is it? Incredibles?
Lunchables.
Lunchables. Yeah, that too. Nachon. Anyway, well, Coach Baruch could have created the world, right, where any way he wanted. So yet he set up a whole process of planting and reaping and sowing and watering, and that's obviously not in the right order, but you get the idea, right? We get physical sustenance from planting seeds and then waiting for that to grow and then reaping the rewards later. Well, spiritual sustenance works the same way, right? Plant seeds today, plant seeds right now, right, and then we'll be zocha, right, to reap the rewards and get the fruit of our labors, right, later in life. Wishing everybody a tremendous day and a tremendous Shabbos and a tremendous return to Chutz La'aretz or continuation of Chutz La'aretz, depending on where you are. Good to see you guys. I'm not going to hang up on you like I did last week, where I fully just dipped. All right, let's pause the recording.